Welcome to today's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast, your channel for super easy, no-nonsense advice on how to declutter and organise your home. Please welcome your hosts, professional organisers Ingrid Jansen and Leslie Spellman.
Hello and welcome listeners to episode 29 of the Declutter Hub podcast. I'm Ingrid. If you have clutter and want to sort it out, this is the show for you. In today's episode, we're talking to Nadia Arbach, owner of Clear the Decks in Oxford. She's a professional declutterer and creativity coach. Nadia motivates and supports creative women in letting go of the clutter they no longer need. She is the host of the Declutter and Organize Your Sewing Space podcast and the creator of 4 online courses about decluttering and increasing creativity. We're both members of the Association of Professional Declutterers and Organizers, and I'm delighted she's on the show. Welcome, Nadia.
Hi, Ingrid. It's so nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. I mean, your podcast is one of the first things I listen to, so I'm delighted you're on my show now. It's great.
Amazing.
And thank you. And I would like to know first, how did you get into organizing? And can you tell us a little bit more about your business?
Yes, of course. My business is called Clear the Decks, and I opened it 3.5 years ago. And if you go back a little bit further in time, about 8 or 9 years ago, I was an extremely cluttered person, a very extremely cluttered creative person. And I had recently taken up quilting, and I worked at the Victoria and Albert Museum at the time, and they had an exhibition about quilting. And because I was in the learning department, I got to program all of the quilting activities. And at the end of every activity, I would take all the remains of the fabric and bring it home with me. So in my tiny London flat, everything became very cluttered very quickly.
Yeah.
And one day, I had a terrible experience where my estate agents called and they said, your landlord is coming in 10 minutes to view the property. And I had to clean the house very quickly, and it was so disorganized and I was so mortified. And I had to throw a bed sheet over my sewing table because I could not clear the clutter fast enough. And so that was what motivated me to get uncluttered and to really truly, look at my craft items and get them into order so that that would never happen to me again. And I was just doing it for myself, but I realized that I enjoyed it so much that I could do it for other people too. Mm-hmm. And that's why I became a professional declutterer. So that's my story. And then I became a professional declutterer, and I loved working with creative people the most because I understood how easy it is to get clutter in a creative space, and I knew I could help them. And so I became a creativity coach as well, so that I could help people not only clear the physical clutter, but also the mental clutter that comes with it, with being a creative person.
Yes, fantastic. I mean, how wonderful to be able to turn your own passion into helping other people. It's fantastic, isn't it?
It's really fun, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Now, today, in today's podcast, Nadia, I would like to talk to you about the habits that crafters typically have that cause clutter in their creative workspace, and also talk about the solutions, of course. And I completely agree with you that we need to understand the underlying reasons for the clutter. If we don't, it will keep coming back. And when we do understand our behaviors and work on overcoming them, it's not just the physical clutter that can be released, it's also the mental clutter too, and the creative blocks. Now, of course, this doesn't happen overnight, but it will lead to increased creativity. So I would love to talk to you about these habits and solutions that you've really brought to the forefront. So let's start with overthinking.
That's the first one of my 7 habits that I realized after a few years of being a professional declutterer for creative people. There are certain things that happen over and over again, and I distilled it down to those 7 habits. The first one is overbuying. Yeah. And overbuying is something that happens quite a lot with a creative person because we see so many beautiful things that we want and we buy them right away without having a specific project in mind to to make with them. And we also love a sale. And so when we find that our favorite craft store has a sale on, or there's a special offer that comes through our email, we often buy things because they're on sale instead of waiting until we actually need them. So like overbuying is just bringing things in without a specific purpose for them, when we already have so many things in our craft space that we don't actually need that extra. And so what my solution is to transform that overbuying into more conscious spending. And obviously the first thing is to set a budget for yourself and set a time when you're actually going to buy. That is the very, very basic, but also to maybe unsubscribe from some of the craft kits that you get in the mail, because I know lots of people who do knitting. For example, there are knitting clubs of the month and you get a whole bunch of more materials. And sometimes it builds up and it gets overwhelming. So I worked with one client who had that coming in for several years and she hadn't used hardly any of it. And so she really needed to just stop that subscription for a while, use up the things that she had, and then maybe resume it afterwards. And another thing is to unsubscribe from those emails that tell you that there are sales on, and realize that actually in today's times, like there are sales all the time. You're not going to miss out on something because you didn't buy it this time, because it will be on sale again later. So that's the way to transform the overbuying into conscious spending, so that we are being very deliberate about what we bring in to the creative space.
Yeah. And so really, if you decide you are going to a shop, go, why am I buying this? When am I going to use it? Is this the stuff that I need for this project? Instead of kind of thinking, oh yeah, that will come in handy one day. I love that. Let's just buy this now. That's exactly what you mean, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Not buying things because they might come in handy one day. And that actually leads right into the second habit.
Yes.
Which is scarcity thinking. I used to call this more like overinflating the value of things that you already own. So with the overbuying habit, it's bringing in too many things into your house. With the scarcity thinking and the overinflated value, it's not letting things go out of your house because you are thinking they're more valuable to you than they actually are. So the key phrase for this one is, it might come in handy one day. I'll use it someday. I spent good money on it, so I'm going to keep it. Or it's perfectly good, even though it's not actually that helpful or useful for you in the projects that you're doing now. And it could be something that you bought 3 years ago and you absolutely loved at the time, but now you've passed that point and it's no longer of use to you. And it's so hard to let those things go because, especially if you've got a scarcity thinking mindset from previous experience in your life or from stories from your family, even if you never lived in lack or scarcity, there's maybe somebody in your family who has, and they pass down those sayings, about keeping things just in case. And that's the thing that we need to transform. And so the solution in my mind is to transform the scarcity thinking into an abundance mindset. And so I ask my clients to take a look around their creative spaces right now and feel so grateful and happy for the tools and the materials that they're actually using, that they use all the time and that serve them extremely well. And then they realize that, yes, this is what I need. And those other things that I was keeping because they might come in handy, I actually probably will never use. And it makes it a little bit easier to let them go. Yeah.
Is it also so, because I see that a lot with my clients as well, who are very creative, they not only then quilt, but they also sew and they knit and they stamp and and it's like, is it possible to maybe pick 1 or 2 activities instead of all 5 or 7? Because there's not enough hours in the day to do so many hobbies.
Yes, that's true. I mean, some people that I've worked with have 5 or 6 hobbies and they
Mhm.
love them all. So I don't ever counsel them to like put a hobby aside forever.
Mhm.
But what I do counsel them to do is to have only a small number of projects that they're doing at the same time. So that
Right.
might exclude one of the hobbies for now.
Yeah.
And then when they finish one project, they pick up another project, maybe from that hobby that they haven't done for a while.
Oh, that's great. That's a really good idea. Love that. Okay. So then let's talk about your third habit,
Mm,
sentimentality. Oh, yes.
yes,
Yes.
sentimentality and nostalgia. And that is a big one. And I have experienced this especially with people who sew, because if there is, I'm sure that this is possible for other kinds of crafts as well, but I've experienced it with sewists the most. If there is somebody in their family who did sewing and who passes away, and they are the person who does sewing in their family, they get a huge amount of materials dumped into their creative space all at the same time. I know that that can happen with other things, but fabrics are actually take up a huge amount of space. So the person is overwhelmed by all of that stuff that they've inherited from a person they love, and how could they possibly give it away or sort through it even? And so that's a very difficult one, because what we're doing in that case is we are making the item a substitute for the actual person. And so if the person is no longer with us, then it's very hard to let go of some of those things. If the person has given us something and they're still with us, we can let go of some of those things and work on other ways to make that relationship closer, more communication, more fun times together, instead of like actual things coming into play. But if you are sentimental about a lot of items that have been passed down to you, it's very difficult. So
Mm.
my solution for that is to transform that sentimentality and nostalgia into looking to the future. So actually looking at the items and thinking, what am I actually going to use in the future, and keeping the best 10% of that and letting the rest go.
Mhm.
Because you have to realize that the person who gave them to you also would have not used all of them. They would have used their favorites. And so you
Yeah.
pick your favorites and you use them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's also an element of nostalgia. If you yourself are keeping things that remind you of fun times that you had, things that you did when you were younger, maybe patterns that used to fit you when they don't anymore. And so you have to look carefully at that too, and look to the future and think, what do I really want to create now, instead of what did I create in the past?
Yeah. I think so much of this is also in other areas of people's homes. We can use this. So I'm so happy we're talking about this, Nadia, because these 7 habits, I mean, we're
Mm.
now talking about crafting, but you can use that with other things as well. So
Oh, yeah,
fabulous.
absolutely.
So fantastic. So let's move on to the fourth habit.
Yes. Okay, that one is the sense of duty. So it works in 2 ways. The first one is, because you're the creative person that people know, they ask you to teach them how to do the thing, or they ask you to make something for them or do something for them, when actually you don't really want to. And saying no is very hard. Saying no is hard for us,
Yes.
because we love to do our craft and we love to make things for people. But when we have a list of things to do for other people, it prevents us from doing the projects that we really love and that we really want to concentrate on. So and the second way of the sense of duty, that when sense of duty works, is that we feel obliged to finish a project that we started, even if it's no longer resonating with us. Even if actually we think, I really don't like that project anymore, but I started it, so I have to finish it. And that is what a lot of creative people do, because they feel such a big obligation. But
Mhm.
the way that I transform this one is to transform the sense of duty into putting yourself first. And that is something that we have not got a lot of practice in doing, putting ourselves first. Creative people, when they want to do their creative work, often do all of the other things first, we tidy the house, we take care of the kids, we take care of our family, and we come last. And then finally, we get a little bit of time to do our creation. And actually, it should be the opposite way around. It should be taking care of ourselves, making sure we have the time to do our creative work, and making sure that we're only working on projects that we actually love. Mm-hmm. So that means saying no to people who ask you to help them be more creative, unless you really want to. And you could really want to. It could make you really happy. But if you don't want to, you have to find a kind and gentle but firm way to say no. Mm-hmm. And if you have projects that you are not enjoying anymore, it is okay to toss them. Mm-hmm. And that is one thing that I tell people, and they're like, oh, no, I couldn't possibly. And then they realize, actually, looking at all the projects that they have, this one is never going to get done because I don't love it. No. And I love the other ones. Yeah. So I'm going to do them first.
I do regular talks for groups, and we always talk about clutter. And one of the things I say is that clutter is everything that you do not love and do not use, and everything that's unfinished. Yes. And I then say, are there any crafters here in the room, or people who love being creative? And then, of course, there's always a couple of hands. So, and then I say, everything, any project that you haven't finished is clutter as well. And they all go, oh, but it makes them think about it. Mm-hmm. And something happens. And I also say, exactly like you, if you're working on a project you do not love doing, let it go and let the materials go. Yeah. We've got little time. And it's so important that the time that we have to do crafting or any hobby, that we use it wisely and we spend it on projects that we actually love to do. Mm-hmm. And I so agree with you that saying no can be so difficult, but it's so important. And sometimes saying no straight ahead can be tricky. And maybe you say, let me think about it. I'm going to get back to you tomorrow. And kind of then, instead of immediately saying yes and then later regret it, being able to say, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to get back to you. And then say, and actually ask yourself, well, do I really want to do this for this other person? And do I really enjoy this project?
Yeah. And if it's still a no, you find a way to say a kind, firm no.
Yeah. And I agree with you. Saying no is okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love this. Okay, very good. Okay, let's go to the fifth one.
Yes. Okay, so this one is about your sense of identity as a creator. And some of us are really influenced by other creative people. And that's as it should be, because we need to get inspiration from somewhere. But there are things that dampen us a little bit, like seeing beautiful projects on Pinterest and thinking, I could never do something like that. Or, seeing somebody in a magazine with a beautiful pattern and you love it, and then you try it and it's not for you. So this is about not exactly knowing where you're going with your own creative work, and being so influenced by outside influences that you actually never get to the point where you understand what you want to do and what you love. And so this can be transformed from a shaky sense of identity into deep self-knowledge by asking yourself the questions about what you actually want as your creative goal. And this is where it gets really intense and deeply soul searching, where you have to tap into your own ideas and your own creativity to figure out what it is that you actually want to do. Bringing influences in from elsewhere, but being your own creative person instead of always following a pattern or always doing something that's trendy. Mm-hmm. And because that brings in clutter, not only physical, but this is a lot of mental clutter that comes up. And it manifests as, I'm not good enough. How could I ever do that? Why even bother? Mm-hmm. And that stops you. It holds you back from doing the projects that you actually love. So the solution is to have that deep self-knowledge by asking yourself the questions about what you really want to accomplish as a creator.
Mm-hmm. I think that also is connected to maybe perfectionism and trying to do everything perfect, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
And exactly what you say. We see all these beautiful magazines and all these beautiful Pinterest pages and Instagram photos, and you think, but my house doesn't look like that. My craft room doesn't look like that. My project doesn't look like that. And then feel that you haven't accomplished anything because it doesn't look like that. And I always say decluttering and organizing is not about having everything perfect. And I think it also really,
Yeah, because a lot of those photos are staged. They're curated in some way. And what we really want to do is actually just bring the joy of creation into your hands and your heart so that you're enjoying the moments that you're spending instead of worrying that you're not doing it well enough.
Yeah. Listeners, such good stuff here talking to Nadia. Oh my goodness. We've already done 5 habits and we still have 2 to go. So let's talk about overwhelm. And of course, that's a word we hear all the time as professional organizers. I'm so overwhelmed. So I'm completely understand that comes up in your 7 habits. Please expand on that a little bit more, Nadia.
Yes. Okay. So overwhelm, because you're so excited about all the projects and you want to do them all at the same time. And you have the materials for so many projects in your creative workspace. And this can be extremely overwhelming when you have too many. Now, what I have as a solution for this is to transform the overwhelm into excitement by making what I call a master project list. So I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit, the master project list, because you would not believe how many times I asked clients, do you have a list of all your projects? And they say, no, I don't. I have like this notebook here filled with this drawing, and I have this notebook over here and this loose sheet over here and a bunch of other things that sort of tell me what projects I'm doing, but I can't even remember half of the things that I wanted to do. So it's a very simple process. You take a sheet of blank paper, you go around your creative workspace, and you list all of the projects that you have underway. You list all of the projects that you have the materials for, but you haven't started yet. And you list all of the projects that are just ideas in your head and you haven't even gotten anything to make them yet. But we need all of those projects in a list on the same paper so that you know exactly what's in your head and exactly what you're working on. And that can number anywhere between 10 and 200. I mean, it could be anything. Like I worked with one client and we ended up having over 100 projects.
Wow.
I worked with other clients who had maybe 50 projects. I made my own list when I devised the master project list, and I had about 22 projects. And I recently redid it, and I have about 27 projects. But most of those ones from the list of 22 have been finished, and these are all new ones. Because whenever you think of a new one, you add it to the list. Now, the thing that you do with the list after you've gotten all of the projects written down is you prioritize them by your excitement level. So if it rates a 5 on excitement level on a scale of 1 to 5, that means you're the most excited. You cannot wait to get started on it. So you go through the list to put a 5 wherever it belongs, and you put other numbers between 1 and 5. 1 means you actually don't care about this project at all anymore. And everything that varies in between 2, 3, and 4. And what you do after that is you cross off all the projects that rated a 1 and all the projects that rated a 2, because you're never going to get to them if you have all those 5s on your list that you really love the idea of and that you really want to work on. And then you get the number 1s and number 2s out of your house and you concentrate on the 3, 4, and 5. And so as to not become too overwhelmed, you pick the 5 projects, maximum 5, that are the most appealing to you to do right now. And those are the ones that you're working on. And only when you finish one of those can you bring up something else from your list to be in those top 5 projects. So you've prioritized everything. You still have the list so you can capture any new ideas. and you can put a priority on them as well. But you have the 5 that you are working on, and then you put them each into a separate container so that you have them all laid out in your creative workspace, so that you can work on them without wondering where the pieces are, and so that you can pick up one, work on it one day, pick up a different one, work on it another day, but there's not too many to think about at the same time. Does that make sense to you?
Completely. So just to recap. So if people are very overwhelmed, you create a master project list. You write down the things you're already working on, the ones that are on the go. You write down the ones you have the materials for but haven't started yet. And you write down all the stuff that's in your head that you would love to do at some point.
Yes.
And
any
then,
specific ideas.
Yeah. And then you look at all of those, you prioritize them by excitement level. I love that. Excitement level,
Yeah,
1 to 5.
level.
1 to 5.
Yeah.
All the 1s and 2s are crossed off the list. You focus, you look at your 3, 4, and 5 categories, and you go, which 5 of those am I going to do now? And those are going to be put in containers ready in my crafting space. So if I have time, I can focus on one of those 5 projects. And only if one of those is done, I can look at my list again and pick something else.
Bingo. You got it. Exactly. Yes. That is the process.
Love this. Okay. Because it's a list and I like a list. Nadia.
Don't we all? Yes.
So does that also mean that if other stuff pops in your head, you keep adding it to your list?
Yes. You keep adding it. Whenever there's a new idea, you put it on the list and you give it a priority number.
Okay. And would you have this list like on a notebook with 3 different, this is I got on the go, or like a one document in a Word or in a Google Doc or in a list in your phone, or how does that work?
I have mine as a Word document. Okay. And I know people who have them on paper. I have done them on paper for clients. And the client who had more than 100 projects, she was a big user of Trello, the app. And so she put them all in the Trello app, and you can probably find other apps that will organize your projects for you. But she loved it because it helped her see exactly what she was doing, exactly when she wanted to do it. And it could also, there's lots of opportunities in Trello to like make a materials list as well. And, so it was very clear for her. It clarified everything. But you can do it on paper. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It all just has to be in the same place.
Yes. So, of course, I want to know now, of the 100 projects, were there any 1s or 2s? And how many did she declutter? Oh,
sure. There were lots of 1s and 2s. And we are still working on decluttering them, in fact. But they're being decluttered. And the top 5 are being worked on.
And that's in the end what it's all about, isn't it?
Yes, and she gets through projects really fast. So Trello actually really helps quite a lot.
I love this. Okay, Listeners, are you ready to make your master project list if you're a crafter? Really, really good advice from Nadia here. So Nadia, let's move on to the 7th habit, and that's disorganized thinking. I would love to know a little bit more about that.
Yes, disorganized thinking is when you step into your creative space and you think, where is that thing that I know I just put down? And how many such and such an item do I have? Oh, I'm out of this thing. Let me go buy it. And then you realize you already have 4 of them. They were just hiding somewhere in your workspace. And you have a tendency not to put things away because you think you're going to forget about them, but you actually forget that they exist anyway because they're hidden under other piles of things. So that's disorganized thinking, and what we would like to do is transform it into helpful systems. So here's where some really basic organizational tips come into play. So bringing everything together, like by like, so all of one type of material is in one place, all of another type of material is in another place, and putting them into, ideally, they would be clear containers, and they would be properly labeled so that you know that all of your things like that are in the same place. And it also manifests itself in creating easy to use systems so that you don't have the clutter building up all the time. So I have found with a few clients that they don't tidy things away after they're finished working on a project for the day. And then they pick a different project to work on, so that one comes and lies on top of the first one. So what we do in that case is we work in a tidy up routine as part of the creative work time. So if you know you only have an hour to work on something, you spend the last 10 minutes of that hour putting everything away in its container ready for you to use the next time. And because sometimes it's not a habit for people to tidy up, this one is a difficult one to put into play. But once it starts getting going, you realize how clear and ready to use your workspace is every time, because you've tidied it away. It's just like in a kitchen when you have to wash the dishes in order for the counter to be clear for the next set of dishes to appear when they have been used. So that is the way that we create helpful systems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. True. I mean, putting stuff away after you've used it is really part of all of those routines. And that's why if people say, I'm going to put it down, no, don't put it down, put it away. And the same goes for crafting. You know, when you've done 45 minutes of knitting, you have to make sure that you put your knitting needles and your wool and your pattern maybe back in the bag, and put the bag where you want to find it the next time.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if you do have got several projects on the go, then it all gets muddled and things, and then it takes longer to find stuff. So you actually have less time crafting, which sounds like crazy, doesn't it? But it's really, we know this from experience, obviously. But if we talk to that and teach our clients and show them that they actually will have more time to do the thing they love because they tidy it up, it's life-changing, isn't it, really?
It really is. And it's a new habit to instill in yourself if you don't have that habit already. And it helps in all areas of your life, not just in crafting.
Yeah.
But, you know, because clutter is quite sticky. If you put one thing down, something else comes and attaches to it somehow by magic, you know, and it all builds up very quickly.
Yeah.
So putting it away.
So are you lucky enough to have a separate craft room, Nadia?
I am not, and that is why I have instilled that habit in myself, because as a sewist and a quilter, I use my dining room table. And so that is definitely needed 3 times a day for other things. And so I have to incorporate a tidy up routine in my making, and I have to have a specific place for my current projects to sit, because there's no dedicated craft room space. So I need to put them somewhere in another room so that they are there and that they're not taking up other space. So I have an area in my dining room which is dedicated to those projects that I have going on. And I have an area that's dedicated to holding my crafting materials. And that's all I have. So they don't build up anywhere else in the house.
Yeah. Like you said, you are a super creative person yourself, and you are sewing, you're quilting, you write poetry, you're a visual artist. Can you give our listeners a couple of tips for their craft room organizing, if they are even lucky enough to have a craft room, a separate craft room, or if they're not lucky enough? Do you want to have boxes with lids, for example? Or can you give us some tips?
Yeah, like I said, clear boxes with lids, definitely, and with labels, so that you can see exactly what's in them. And if space permits, you put them all in the same place in the area of a room. That's if you don't have like a dedicated space. Now, if you have a really, really tiny space, you may have to divide your items, you know, some types of things in one room, some types of things in another room. But at least if they're in labeled clear boxes and you know which room they're in, you don't have a problem, because you know where to go to get your items. If you do have a dedicated craft space, then if you create space for yourself vertically by going up the walls, that doesn't just mean shelving, that can mean hooks to put scissors on, that can mean some kind of like storage solution that goes vertically up the wall. I'm thinking of a sewing room specifically, but I've seen some beautiful sewing rooms with thread holders that go all the way up the wall. And there could be also underbed storage for the people who don't have the dedicated space.
Mm-hmm.
And I also would like to give a shout out to all the writers who don't necessarily have physical objects or many physical objects for their craft, but they do have a lot of digital space being used on their laptop or computer or wherever that also needs to remain organized. So they need to be looking at where their files are on their device and keeping those in an organized fashion as well, and also deleting the ones that are no longer useful for them.
Excellent. Such good stuff, listeners. So, listeners, are you ready to do some decluttering and organizing of your craft materials and take all Nadia's fantastic advice on board? Is there anything else, Nadia, you would like to discuss with our listeners or give as a top tip? Or is there anything that we've missed? Because I mean, it's such good quality. Anything else that you'd like to add?
Yes, actually, I do have one parting thought, which is creators can get messy when they're actually working. And so be okay with it being a mess when you are right in the middle of your project, when you are working on your creative work, because that is where you are allowing yourself the freedom to create. If you need to have things all over the place, then do. It's just that when you finish that session, you bring everything together and you tidy it up so that it is clear and ready to use again. But don't get worried that it's looking really messy while you're in the stages of creating, because that is where the fun and the joy is happening, and you just do what you need to do.
Love that too. That's it for this episode, listeners. We hope you've all enjoyed listening to Nadia and her fantastic advice and are inspired to take action. Thank you, Nadia, for being our guest.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
I've loved talking to you, and I loved finding out more about your 7 Habits method and your tips, and especially your master project list. Really, really thought that was great advice as well. Listeners, I hope you've learned a lot today, and Nadia's examples will be helpful for you, and you can implement them in your own home. If you'd like to know more about Nadia's podcast and a free resource she has on her website, we will post a link in the show notes along with her website details, and you can check her out and check out her free resource. Thanks for taking the time to listen today. If you'd like to get more tips and advice, please follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and have a lively, supportive Facebook group community where we chat all things clutter, and we'd love to see you there. If you don't want to miss the next weekly episode, subscribe to the Declutter Hub podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher, and it will pop into your notifications each Friday. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast. Check out declutterhub.com for more inspiration, and don't forget to tune in next week.